Magnetic Energy by Kevin Orlowski. You got me? Am I coming through? All right, good. This is a very condensed presentation, and so I'm going to run through some stuff very quickly. If you want to get some backstory on this, just do some searching on like Rory Johnson, Gerald Orlowski, my dad, and the magnetron motor, and that will bring you up with, there's some articles, there's some talks that my dad's done on this, and there's all kinds of information. As far as getting more about the units that I'm going to talk about, go to magneticenergy.org.uk. And I'll be presenting that. I'll go through that website again so you guys, in case you miss it. Now, magnetic energy, as I'm presenting it, it really comes from higher consciousness, okay? And when you combine this technology with higher consciousness on a global scale, and that will happen. It's going to happen. We will have a world that is pollution-free. It's a big statement. We will have a world that is free of scarcity, and that has a ton of implications to it as well. We'll have a world that's free of hunger. We'll have a world that's free of disease. We'll have a world that's free of the limitations of transportation on and around the planet and interstellar. So when you get into this world of magnetic energy, it's so much more than just like simple electricity. And what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to try to do the impossible. I'm going to present to you how you produce neutral flowing magnetic current in less than 30 minutes. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is because neutral flowing magnetic current is one of the key components of magnetic energy. And when you have neutral flowing magnetic current, if you can think it, you can do it. And that's one of the reasons why this technology has to be so intimately linked to higher consciousness. So, go to magneticenergy.org.uk if you want more details on this. We're going to jump right into a unit called the mini-romag. This unit is about 5 inches by 5 inches. This is a small unit, okay? This is the simplest of all the units that's on the site. Produces the equivalent of 3.5 volts, 7 amps. It runs at about 2100 RPMs, has a startup time. This is a simple unit that produces a small amount of magnetic current that's designed to run smaller devices on magnetic energy. This unit has been built by a lot of people. We used to sell the kits for it. So the engineering analysis, I'm going to present to you as a brief analysis of this unit. This has been corroborated by people all over the planet. I mean, there is no debate about whether or not it does what we say it does, and I just want to make that clear. This is a side view of the unit with the magnets, and if you see here, right here, this is the side view of the magnet, and then this is the brass rotor, the copper stator. It has coils around it, and I'll get into some more views. The reason I'm showing this is because there's a common theme in these units. You will never see a magnet just sitting in a rotor. Like you're never going to see in any of our units, you won't just see a magnet sitting in a brass rotor and just letting its field run wild. All the fields are contained, they are directed. This particular design, as we'll get into it, produces an orthogonal magnetic field. And so this magnet's wrapped in mylar. Then it has copper-coated steel wire around it, like a small coil around it. Then around that, it has some more copper-coated steel wires that are jutting out. That's the end of the wires on those red things coming out. And then around that, there's some mica insulation. All of these components are very specifically designed to produce a certain effect as this unit's rotating. It helps to produce a release effect when it comes into the coils. And here's just kind of an overall view. I'll go through this very quickly. So you've got your rotor and your stator, you've got your 6 coils around here, you've got your aluminum base. This is copper, that's brass. The magnets are alternating in their polarities, and as you can see right here, this shows the different ways that the magnets are alternating. And the arrows basically just show the direction of the wires around the magnets. Another common theme with these units is you'll see the magnets are almost always rotated, or they're alternating in polarities. And so you're going to see north-south, 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 and then the bottom row is the same thing. The coils around these magnets are also all interconnected. So we kind of produce this little global effect of the fields around the rotor. This is a top view of the unit, and it shows you, what I want you to focus on just primarily, just for a second here, is how the coils are connected. So you've got this side of this coil runs to the same, the corresponding side of this coil. This one connects over to the corresponding side, and so on. So the coils are all connected as well. So we've got communication happening between the rotor and the stator through the coils. And one thing, if you ever get to the site and you really start digging into these units, this is by far the simplest unit that we have. Try not to focus too much on the hardware. What you're trying to focus on are the energy fields created by the hardware. And that's really important because, as you see, this looks really familiar, right? See this little Jewish star happening here? See this little sacred geometry? All of these units have some sort of sacred geometry, and when these units start spinning and they hit a certain speed and they're pulsing magnetic fields, they create these sacred geometry fields, these rotating magnetic fields, and that produces some very specific effects that we have to have in order for any of this stuff to work. So let's get into this real quick. What we're comparing here is just a typical conventional generator to the mini-romag generator. The conventional side is right here on the left, mini-romag's on the right, and you can already see there's quite a difference. I'm just going to go through this. All of you probably recognize what this is, but I'm going to do it anyway, in case somebody online doesn't know what we're talking about. This is just a basic oscilloscope reading that is monitoring the voltage that's running through the coils. And so you can already see, as there's a couple differences I got to point out real quick. We're talking primarily about the north face of the magnet moving into the coil. As you can see, that on a typical generator, you've got the vertical axis of the coil. On the mini-romag, of course, it's tangential, so it's on its side, it's horizontal. In the conventional approach, as the north face of the magnet moves into the coil, and this is all very standard stuff, I'm not saying anything nobody doesn't already know, we create a north pole polarity and negative voltage. As you can see, that the voltage drops. And then as the north face exits the typical coil, you create your opposing field and you create the opposite voltage. So what happens is, and everybody knows this, and this is one of the primary reasons why engineers and scientists say, oh my God, none of this technology can ever work. Because in a conventional generator, you immediately run into magnetic coupling. You've got, this thing locks up. This whole thing starts locking up in a conventional generator. It's a magnetic lock, and it's, the fields are created. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt, just information from the police officers handing out parking tickets to cars within 5 feet of intersections or on stop signs, and personal block driveways.
Thank you for that. If you guys didn't hear that, parking tickets if you're 5 feet of intersection, move your car, please. Okay, so on the right side, we're talking about the mini-romag now. We've got this orthogonal magnetic field. As that north pole approaches the coil, everything is different in this whole process. So the north pole is created on the left side of the coil versus the bottom of the coil. It does create a minor negative voltage as shown. I'll get into this in just a second, what's happening right here. As it exits, it creates another minor negative voltage as shown. So the first thing you notice is, wow, it's an asymmetrical signal. It's completely different than a conventional generator, and there is no magnetic coupling. So the first thing you notice is, wow, this moves right through. There's nothing locking, nothing is, but what it gets even weirder. At that spike in energy, as you can see here, the magnetic flux drops to 0. Now that's really counterintuitive. It's like, what's happening here? On here, it's kind of obvious, you know, it looks like, well, typical generator, this is kind of how the pattern flows. But in the mini-romag, you get this amazing spike in energy in the coil with the magnetic flux at 0. And we attribute that partly to the back EMF, but I'll also talk in a minute about what else is happening inside this unit. So, just this fact alone should be enough to have any typical conventional engineer or scientist wake up. Just the fact that this very simple design does not produce magnetic coupling demonstrates the generator principle of this unit. But then let's get into how could the mini-romag really act as a motor though? How could it sustain its running? Now keep in mind, this unit will only continue running if it's joined to another unit that's pulling energy off of it. And that's really critical to note. Now the other units aren't necessarily like that, but this is the simple design. This is the basic. This is the little baby of the units. There's a phenomenon that's happening as we've got these alternating poles saturating these coils. This coil right here, as it goes through its interchange with this magnet, this coil attracts the next magnet. So not only is there no magnetic coupling, but as the magnets are moved around the rotor, the next coil is pulling the magnet toward it because of the charge that's created in the coil. And so this really demonstrates how the unit can run as a motor as well as a generator. Now, the magnetic pulse generation cycle for neutral magnetic current, and that's a kind of a mouthful. If you can understand this cycle and master this cycle, you can produce an unlimited amount of neutral magnetic current. And I'll talk for a little bit in a second about why that might be important and what we can actually do with that. So we start off combining polarities. So we're alternating the magnets, we're saturating the coils with opposing fields. Now, but the fields they're not arguing with each other. These fields want to be together. They want to come together inside the coil. Every little thing about this basic unit is precisely designed to produce this effect. The strength of the magnets, the speed of the rotor, the size of the coil, the size of the wire on the coil, everything works in conjunction to allow a magnetic buildup to happen every time a group of magnets passes the coil. If those ratios aren't correct, the unit will not function. You have to have it exactly as we're saying. Exactly. I mean, and then you can play around with it, you can get lower effects and you know, but essentially you have to have the correct ratios. Because as we get a magnetic buildup, you got to picture you've got 6 magnets in alternating polarities, they're turning in front of 6 different coils, but all those coils are connected. So every time a south pole hits a magnet, a north pole's hitting that same coil, it's coming through the other wire. And that's happening all over the unit. We're blending polarities like crazy in this unit. And we're producing this neutral effect. And then what happens right here is we achieve threshold. So the magnets get saturated, the magnets saturate the coils get saturated to the point where they're going to breach threshold and they're going to produce a neutral magnetic pulse. That neutral magnetic pulse is then what we are going to capture. We're going to blend that with the other pulses, and this unit produces about 1,200 pulses a second. When you open up the coils and you let the wires flow to another unit, those neutral magnetic pulses make a nice little stream of magnetic current. They all combine. So we're achieving threshold with the pulses. Ideally, you would offer the pulses a path. And that path could be like we have a lot of units, but it could be like a pump, for example. You put a couple mini-romags together, you offer them the pump, and the pump will draw the neutral magnetic current out of the mini-romags. If you don't connect the mini-romag to another unit, what happens is the coils will just stay saturated. And if they stay saturated, it's not going to run itself because it's not going to create that draw. It's not going to create that field of attract. So you offer the pulse a path. As soon as you do that, you breach the coils with magnetic pulses. The magnetic pulses are already on their way. The stuff travels faster than light. It gets into like quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement and all kinds of stuff. As soon as those pulses leave, those coils have communicated with the coils around the magnet. You've got this void of energy that happens. And it looks like there's no magnetic loss happening. It looks like the magnets just went dead for a second. But then you've got this great spike in energy in the coils, which we showed a second ago. So what happens is, this unit has a draw factor. All the units on the site have a draw factor. When you create that void, that draw factor rushes in. Now, this is really critical because the unit has to pulse at a certain frequency or a certain pulse rate to have that draw factor be optimal. Okay? So the Earth has a pressure flow around it. It has a pressure flow of energy around it. In order to tap into that pressure flow, we've got to synchronize with it. So this unit, when it's spinning at the correct RPM, and you're saturating those coils and you're letting those pulses leave, we're tapping into that system of energy that's all around us. And it'll fill that void, it'll recharge the system, it'll saturate those coils, and it'll do it again. And it'll do it at about 1,200 times a second. Now, for more information, there's more detail on this stuff at the website, magneticenergy.org.uk. This is the Romag generator, and this is the larger version of the mini-romag generator. It has significantly higher output. This is just kind of an open view, so you can just kind of see into it. And I'll talk about that just for a quick second. It's about 180 pounds, about this big, about that high. It produces the equivalent of 50 horsepower. It runs things like this. This is a magnetic pump that's designed to water a 100-acre farm. Runs about 1,600 RPMs. It's pretty small, about 9 inches in diameter. And here's a magnetic water purifier. The point of this is I'm showing you that neutral magnetic current can be put to work. If you've got the right devices, it can do things like purify water, like pump water, like run engines, like this magnetic piston. This thing is interesting because you can join them in a series like you could any set of pistons. It produces 5,600 piston strokes. It's 7 horsepower per piston. But the fascinating thing about this is it doesn't have rotation on its side. It doesn't have like after these units get in their startup phase and they start running the way they're supposed to, they have a little bit of rotation assisting them. This doesn't have that benefit. So what this unit really demonstrates is that the pressure flow around the planet is so incredibly consistent and it's so high speed, one lapse in that pressure flow and this thing stops working. And so we rely on this. Now this is the Magnagen engine. Over the years, I mean, we've sold kits, we've helped people build units around the world, we've been involved in a lot of projects on this stuff. Rory Johnson initially developed the magnetron motor, and after he died, my dad worked very closely on that engine. And this is the sister unit to the magnetron motor. This is a 480 horsepower. This is a strong unit. This can replace internal combustion engines. The point I want to make with this is that if you know the ratios and you understand the technology, you can scale these things up, you can scale them down. It doesn't matter. And they can be large. They can run houses. They can run cities. They can run anything you want. They can also be very small as long as you keep the ratios intact. This is a counter-rotating magnetic unit, and the only reason I included this one in here is because it demonstrates that if you combine neutral magnetic current with certain elements like crystals and stuff, you will produce various effects. One of the effects of this is a rhodonite crystal in here, and this is all cut away so you can see, but this actually extends out here and everything. When you combine neutral magnetic current at this certain frequency with like rhodonite crystal and other crystals, you will produce a light. So you got like a magnetic light, and the idea, this is just to demonstrate that the units can do all kinds of stuff. This is kind of the mother of the units, the particle transmuter. It's designed to produce very clean neutral magnetic current that can run devices. This is something that you can basically decentralize the power grid with. In the future, you could have like several houses running on this. These can be made in various sizes as well. This is a motor that runs in conjunction with that unit, runs on neutral magnetic current, produces horsepower. This is a heater, and the purpose of this is just to show, I included this in this brief PowerPoint, just to show that when you take neutral magnetic current, you combine it with certain gases, you also produce certain effects like heat. So you can do this like, you can imagine just using it for heating homes or using it in industry or whatever you need. You can also produce cooling depending on what you do with it. So magneticenergy.org.uk. And let me see what our time is. I got a few minutes. Okay, so what can neutral magnetic current do? And I'm just going to give a few quick examples because we're on a kind of a time schedule.
You can take up the whole slot up to 11.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. So, the most obvious thing that neutral magnetic current can do is power magnetic devices. That's kind of the point of it to some degree, right? But you can pulse neutral magnetic current. Now this is kind of where the quantum mechanics of this comes into play. We really are dealing with an energy that exists at a quantum level. So this stuff can travel through anything. Earth, water, air, space. It doesn't really matter. You can pulse this energy and you can sync up units and they become quantum entangled, and it can do pretty much, it can go as fast as you can imagine, nearly an infinite velocity, much faster than the speed of light, and it can go through just about anything. Now, our society currently in our so-called technological age, which is great, I'm not knocking what's happened, okay? It's good. We've achieved a lot. I mean, I love driving up Highway 93 and having it be closed on the way here because a 50-mile-per-hour wind blew down a power line, and in the middle of the night all our power goes out because of our antiquated grid system that's just a joke. I mean, I love all that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I love computers. I love the current technology. And maybe without the current technology, maybe we really couldn't have magnetic energy. So maybe there's a blessing in disguise there. But our society has been functioning with positive and negative, with ones and zeros, with plus and minus. It's like we're painters and we've got one brush in one hand and one brush with the other hand, and we've got two colors of paint. We got black and white, and that's it. And we've created this entire world on two colors. When you get into magnetic energy, it is so far superior to electricity and its versatility. Every single magnet has a different polarity. It's every single pulse rate does something different. The elements that make up the magnet, the speed of the pulse rate, the intensity of those magnets, all these things create different polarities. When you play with this energy, when our society becomes magnetic energy driven, we will have an infinite variety of brushes. We will have an infinite variety of colors to play with. It's a completely different paradigm. You can't even compare it to electricity. This is one of the things that will come into play, there's no doubt about it. Magnetic energy pulsed at certain fields, pulsed at certain frequencies, produces force fields. Those force fields can be around your vehicles, they can be around your spaceships, they can be wherever you need them, but you'll have force fields, there's no doubt about it. Now, this gets kind of back into the quantum thing, and it gets kind of back into atomic physics and all kinds of stuff, but what I'll say about this briefly is the strong force is a myth. I know all you guys in the black government already know this, and all my friends in the FBI, you already know all this. The strong force is a myth, okay? When you subject matter and elements to certain magnetic pulse rates and frequencies, there is no strong force. And when you get into this technology and you start to see the nature of matter and the nature of energy, well, there is no matter. There's no such thing as matter. With this technology, you can replicate energy, which is what we call matter. You could replicate this. You can break this down. You can generate this from a template, an energy template that exists in a state of flux. So you could produce multiple podiums, if you will, multiple crystals, if you will. And I'll talk about this for a second. Everything that I'm presenting and everything that's on the site, this is the industrial stage of this technology. This is the hardware. This is the down and dirty. This is so that scientists and engineers can begin to understand how the pulses work, how the technology functions. But this is just the first generation of this stuff. The next generation is probably going to be crystal-based, because once you document all the pulse rates and everything that's happening in the units, and you've got all that recorded, you don't really need the units anymore. You can work straight out of crystals with this stuff. But until that happens, well, we got units and we can use the units, and that's fine. So you can immediately see with just this alone, how you will have an end to pollution, an end to garbage. And that may be how magnetic energy is really introduced on a global scale. It may be used to just clean up things first. So we stop threatening other industries, and we stop getting people killed, and we stop getting all our shops destroyed. Maybe what we'll do is we'll just clean up garbage, because you can use the technology to do that, and then we're not really threatening too many major players, right? So that may be how it enters the global scene, is by just being a cleaning thing. Like you can use the water purifier and the pump and all kinds of things to break down garbage, to break down matter, to clean the water, to clean the ocean, everything, to clean the nuclear power plants that are spilling over in Japan. So, that may be the path, and we'll see. Obviously, it can provide power for transportation. Anything that's an internal combustion unit is pretty antiquated and going to be pretty obsolete when this technology hits the scene. And then it goes way beyond that, because it's not just about giving us a better engine so that we can squeal the wheels like Rory Johnson used to do in the 70s with his magnetron motor, driving up and down the street day after day after day after day after day, just demonstrating the power of the device. Zero pollution, 480 plus horsepower. It's not really about that. It goes so far beyond just replacing an internal combustion engine. We're talking about levitation, we're talking about teleportation, we're talking about the ability to have people have transportation in a whole new way. It's a whole new paradigm. Obviously, we talked a little bit about this. It can be used to produce heat and cold, which is important, and kind of all your typical daily functions. Detecting particles up close and far away. We're talking about just replacing the technology of like telescopes and microscopes, electron microscopes, all this kind of stuff. With magnetic technology, you can get so incredibly accurate, detailed images of things that are far away or things that are up close. It really brings us not only into the quantum world, but it brings us into the galactic world in a whole new way. Alleviate gravity. Gravity is a form of magnetic energy. It is every celestial body has a pulse rate. All those pulse rates are identifiable. The Earth itself, 21,000 pulses per second, is what it typically fluctuates at with magnetic pulses. When you know what's happening with these things, you can alleviate gravity. There's absolutely no reason for people to believe that gravity is some force that can't be overcome. It's overcome all the time. You got the right pulse rate, you got the magnetic pulse rate, there is no more gravity holding you down. Not only that, but you can make stronger gravity fields. Like for industrial purposes, you might want fields that are even stronger for certain things. Travel at a nearly infinite velocity, we kind of touched on that. And that really kind of has to do with kind of getting into the quantum world, the fourth dimension stuff. This whole pressure system that our universe is kind of in, with this flow of energy through it, and it comes through these magnetic rivers through space, and it travels through planets, and then it goes through these vortexes, and it finally gets down to us. That energy is really an infinite supply. And one of the definitions that we've always worked with over the years is magnetic energy is a latent field of pulsing neutrons that is nearly inexhaustible. So when you think about that statement, it's a latent field, it's always there, it's ready for action. They're pulsing neutrons, so they always have specific pulse rates that you can tap into. The neutron, the golden boy, right? It's always been the mystery. How do we capture the neutron? What can we do with the neutron? The neutron's so elusive. The neutron's here and gone the next moment. God, the neutron, it's like frustrated science for 100 years. What do we do with the neutron? When you have the magnetic device is sending out the proper signal, they send out the proper pulse rate, and they send out neutral magnetic pulses, they cause neutrons to coalesce into what we call magnetrons. Magnetrons would be like a cluster of neutrons. Those magnetrons then can get drawn into the units as a substantial pulse of energy. Once those magnetrons are streaming into the unit, we take those magnetrons and we convert those into neutral flowing magnetic current, which then we can do all kinds of stuff with. So the neutrons are real, the neutrons are capturable, if you will. The neutrons can be utilized. Now there's a couple really important points about this. We're currently running this electric grid around our planet that we strongly believe is really damaging for the planet. We think the planet's an electromagnetic device, primarily a magnetic device, that's not really compatible with electricity. Electricity doesn't really recycle the way energy is supposed to. When you're using magnetic energy, and all these units do this, it's very critical that you recycle the energy. It's very critical that the unit it's a channel of energy. It brings energy in, it lets energy out. It uses energy in the process. It always is recycling energy. This is not an these are not over-unity devices. This is not perpetual motion. There is a power source. There is a power release, but we're using the energy in the process. This is inevitable because of our obsession with this in our society. If magnetic energy comes on board, you are going to see quantum computing that's just going to blow people's minds, because this technology really allows you to have an infinite amount of data storage. And it's way so far beyond ones and zeros, there's really no comparison. Then you get into computing speed, and we, as far as we know, it's almost an infinite processor. So you're not going to be limited to hardware, you're not going to be limited to circuits. This is a new generation in computing that's going to really blow people's minds, and hopefully that will happen with higher consciousness, because if it doesn't, we're screwed. Here's some of the essential things about these units, and I'm just going to touch on this because these are just practical points that have to do with running these units. And if you ever are involved in making these units or making your own units, and you're like, well, why the heck isn't this thing working? Like, what's happening with my unit? These are some of the issues that you could come across that could really shut you down. So the first one is, this type of technology, typically, especially at this level of the game, when we're in the industrial phase, it almost always has a startup process, because as it starts to build that draw factor, and as the magnets are spinning and the coils are getting saturated, we've got to reach that point of synchronization inside the unit where a pulse rate is established. The pulses need to get to the point where they're combining and everything's functioning the way it should. That's a startup process. And so, if you have one unit already going, you can start up another unit, that's fine, or you can hand crank stuff. There's a multitude of ways to start it up, but there usually is a startup process to these units. This technology and this energy is not compatible with electricity. You cannot take the romag and turn your fridge on with it. You can't do that. It's not going to work. It's not compatible with electricity. The reason primarily for that is electricity is a forced energy, and that's one of the things we strongly believe is wrong with it. You are forcing a magnetic field through a copper coil. You are forcing the generation of power. This is a completely opposite paradigm to that. This is a neutral magnetic flow that must be attracted out of the unit. You cannot force neutral magnetic current down a wire. It's not going to happen, because it needs to be attracted to something. And so it's really critical to understand. You could have a romag sitting out on a farm, running with a pump just fine. Everything's cool. Then you take that romag into the like the first floor of the basement of a skyscraper, and the thing stops working because you've got 40 floors or whatever above you of steel and electrical wires, and that thing can't get a draw factor. And so you got to be careful with these units. They're not compatible with electricity. And it's interesting, our human bodies, at least this is the paradigm we're coming from, our human bodies are similar to that. Our human bodies also receive and release energy, the same energy. but the units just do it at a higher scale. Our human bodies are much happier out in nature. There's a lot more energy flowing through them. When we're inside of a skyscraper sitting around electrical fields and tons of steel, our draw factor is getting cut off. It's a struggle. Our bodies are struggling. People get exhausted. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on that one. Alternating magnetic polarities. We've been over that a couple times. It's very critical. If you're going to be blending polarities or producing a neutral magnetic current, you've got to alternate the polarities. Specific metals, you will see like most of the units have things like copper, brass, aluminum, and then there will be some special blends of metals like red brass cast. All of these metals play a part in producing a pulse rate, in producing a draw factor, in producing a track field to the energy around the unit. Every metal kind of interacts with magnetic energy in a different way. And so you'll often see like aluminum as a base plate because aluminum tends to reflect the magnetic energy and help contain it. The other thing is you'll see the units are typically contained. Like there's either like a plastic shield over them, or there's air being trapped inside of the unit. In some cases there'll be a slight amount of air pressure in the unit. And that's important because the units, that air in there is being utilized. It's helping with the process. As the magnetic fields start rotating, those molecules are contributing to the action that's happening, like with the coils and the magnets and everything. Redistributing circuitry. The very most basic example of this was on the mini-romag, how we're redistributing the wires to the coils. The redistributing circuitry can get very complex in some of these units because we're talking a lot of power, and there's basically, the general idea of this is you want to balance out the energy field in the unit. As you create a draw factor, the energy fields tend to come in, they'll create pockets of energy around the unit. They'll create, like it'll be stronger here and stronger, and it's all measurable. So you have this circuitry that interconnects the coils and interconnects the magnets, and it kind of creates this redistribution of energy around the unit so that when you start combining pulses and you get this global pulse happening, everything's very well balanced. If you don't have that, you take that circuitry out, the thing stops working. That's why, one of the reasons why, when people showed up and Rory Johnson wanted to stop his unit from working, he cut those wires, he cut that stuff off, and it's very hard if you don't understand the unit to figure out how that stuff gets reconnected in there. Control mechanisms. We've all seen this stuff over the years. I mean, there's been people working on this technology for over 100 years. It's easy. And I'm sure there's many generations that we don't even know about, thousands and who knows how many years ago, that have also done this technology. But you've got to have control mechanisms, and you heard the classic stories. Once you get a draw factor going, that thing's going to pull in energy. Once it locks onto the ionosphere and it starts channeling that energy, it's going to pull it in. And if you don't have a control factor, it'll overload the unit. It'll blow up the unit. So control mechanisms are always part of these units. There's things that cause release of overloads. There's circuitry that will prevent an overload. There's certain size of wires that you have to stick with so that if it breaches saturation, otherwise you run into trouble. And the unit can run out of control. The pulse combining, we talked about that. And containing the atmosphere, we talked about that. There's more stuff here at magneticenergy.org.uk, and let me check my time. So, we can take this however you guys want to do this. I was expecting to do this very short, so I had a condensed PowerPoint. I can throw in another PowerPoint and continue, or we can just talk for a minute, we can do Q&A. And I'll let you guys decide whatever you want to do.
I just had a question. I didn't see this on today's thing, so I just wondered.
No, it wasn't, and that's because they called me at the last minute and asked me to come in. My name's Kevin, and I've been on a team that's been working on this stuff for over 30 years. My dad worked with Rory Johnson back in the 70s, and Rory Johnson, I can tell you that guy, if you guys, well, let me just ask, let's do a show of hands. How many of you know who Rory Johnson is and know that story? Raise your hand. Okay, well, this is great. So what I'm gonna do then is just share this story with you because it's one of the coolest stories. It's where our story began, was with Roy Johnson. This was in the 1970s. And Roy Johnson invested millions of dollars into a unit that he developed called the magnetron motor. The magnetron motor was a free energy device. It was a magnetic energy device combined with some cold fusion technology, which is also on the site. And he had units running in vehicles. There was no question about it. The units were running. They were silent. They were pollution free. They were over 500 horsepower. My dad met Roy Johnson in Chicago, around Chicago, Illinois in the 70s. At the time, my dad was an equipment developer and designer for Greyhound and Armor. And my dad had a bunch of patents and stuff. So he immediately hit it off with Roy Johnson and became very excited and really actually obsessed with the technology. My dad went straight to Greyhound and said, hey, I've got something for us. I want to put this thing in buses. The board of directors said, you're on it, do it, set it up. We want to see those things in buses. Goes back to Roy Johnson, talks to him, says, Roy's like, I'm on board, let's do it. They had a lot of funding. I mean, they had hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. So we're getting contracts drawn up, everything's looking good. Next thing you know, your little typical story, Rory starts freaking out. Rory leaves in the middle of the night, takes all his stuff, runs away, runs off to California. So people talked to Rory, he got scared. Rory kind of shut down. Next thing you know, we find Rory dead in his house. So my dad starts working with his partner. Some guys show up, raid the shop, take sledgehammers to the units, take all the material, take everything away. My dad's like, well, let's not give up. We still have some stuff we can salvage this. Let's keep working on this. So they start putting their own money into it. Start developing units. And that's kind of where our story started. And then 30 years later, you know, you see the tech, and there's a bunch of stuff on the site, magneticenergy.org.uk, and there's other units too that we have that we won't even show to the public, but that kind of got the ball rolling, and the evidence, the proof was there. There was no question about it, and like I said, it's all about consciousness. This technology really comes from higher consciousness, and I'll just wrap it up with that. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you move them from magnets?
You're saying that you can then in the future move from magnets to crystals.
Mm-hmm.
How is that transition?
Well, okay. When this technology becomes established, and I'm going to say some things that are very controversial now, and if you laugh, don't worry. I've had conventional training in science, and I laughed pretty hard at some of this stuff too until you see it working. There's a lot of elements that we don't really use right now, and just saying it, I can't even believe it myself, right? But there's a lot of stuff in the universe that we're just not that aware of yet. But as you start getting into magnetic energy and you start documenting what certain pulse rates do and what's actually available to us, it becomes very apparent that there's a lot more out there than we're currently utilizing. And once those pulse rates are documented, they can be stored. And different crystals are going to store that energy and house that energy like batteries. So you're going to have this whole system, and then it'll go beyond that. Because as we start modifying the crystals and we get into this quasi-crystal metal stuff, which some of that's on the site too, you're going to have metal and crystal combinations and things that will just have draw factors to specific polarities and pulse rates. And they'll just keep drawing it and releasing it, drawing it and releasing it, and then we'll harness off those crystals and do whatever we need to do with it. So you might have crystals that produce heat, you might have crystals that produce cold, you might have crystals that produce force fields. You might have crystals that produce teleportation in the sense that they'll sync up with each other, and you'll have like a gateway here, and you'll have a gateway in France, and those gateways will be interlocked. They'll be quantum entangled, and when you move through one, you're going to come right out the other one because the energy is just absolutely synced up. So that's probably the next generation. But that's what this technology will end up leading to, because even if you can replicate units, like, I mean, so we take a transmuter and we start replicating it, we have all these transmuters. At some point, it just gets cumbersome, and you say, well, shoot, we don't even need all that, because bearings wear out. Things wear out, we've seen it happen. The things don't last forever, you gotta replace parts and stuff. Why do that when you can go to crystal technology?
Do we still have the technology that was put in Rory's car? And if we do, how come it's not all the diagrams and all the technology published? So it can be repeated.
You know, I actually brought the drawings, but I don't have them with me. But you can get them. You can get stuff off the site. That the Magnagen engine that I showed is the closest we have to it, to the magnetron. It's what we call the sister unit to it. And I'll talk about one thing real quick. And if I really am to go, I got a few more minutes. So. Okay, so there were some issues with the magnetron motor, okay? And one of those issues was that the magnets were being drained after it ran for too long. And so one of the things that we learned through all kinds of different things, but including testing, is that magnets all have a draw factor. Now, I know this is going to sound crazy, and I almost want to just laugh even saying it. But the conventional view is that everything in a magnet is contained within the magnet. Our view is completely different than that. Our view is that every single magnet is an open system of energy. There's energy coming into the magnet, there's energy going out of the magnet. And actually, we believe that's the way it is with everything. There's nothing that's a closed system. Everything's an open system. There's energy coming out of this, there's energy leaving. There's coming into this, it's leaving this. Everything's an open system. It's completely different than how we grew up, how we were taught in college and physics and everything. The magnets were being drained because they were too close to the outer housing and they couldn't get a draw factor coming in. So when we made that adjustment, they no longer got drained, because now they can pull in the energy the way they're designed to do it, and they'll go on forever. I mean, you see like there's samples in the earth and core samples of the pole shifts and everything. And there's magnetite that's been thousands and thousands of years old. It's still working just fine, because nothing's influencing its draw factor. It's always got that energy going in it. And so that open system, and that's another thing, I'll get into this, and this is going to sound weird. And I apologize. I apologize to everyone. And don't shoot the messenger, I'm just the messenger, not the designer. We've been going by these terms north and south, and it's really not the way it is. It's really not north and south. It's really inflow and outflow. Inflow and outflow. Inflow is attracted to outflow. Magnets will hook up and they'll create an inflow and outflow through two magnets. When the fields repel, they're not compatible, so you've got like an outflow trying to hit into an outflow on repel. If you just take that concept that it's not north and south, it's inflow and outflow, then you start to realize why these units run and why this stuff works. Because if you can control the field, and if you can pulse the magnet and the coils around the magnet, you can dramatically increase the performance of that magnet. Like in the mini-romag, those magnets are so weak, you almost can't even get them manufactured that weak. In fact, when you go to order them, and we used to order them in bulk, and we had to go through China when we were selling kits of them, and they'd say, why would you want the magnet that weak? It's not going to do anything. It's not even going to work. It won't even hold up anything. Well, but it does work. It still has an inflow and an outflow. And it works precisely the way we need it to work to saturate the coils at such a close distance at 2100 RPMs. Now, and it looks weak, but once the thing starts pulsing and it's got a global pulsing happening, all of a sudden those little magnets become pretty strong. And they start producing this really nice, strong pulse rate. And so, it's, like I said, don't look at the hardware, look at the field. The magic is in the field that's being produced by the hardware.
Kevin, you showed some models and designs. Are those available anywhere? Are you supplying those with your company?
Well, okay, everything on the site there's designs and stuff on the site, there's stuff on the site. my business partner and I were selling kits until he vanished off the face of the earth. And he was my friend actually, and our shop was destroyed. So we're not selling any kits at the time. So that's just the way it is. And
How recent was that?
Just a few years ago.
Okay, and do you see that changing in the?
Yeah, I do see that changing. There's no question that it is going to change. This technology is in the hands of a lot of people with a lot of power around the world. And yeah, it's being kept under wraps, but they have it. We know they have it. We've given it to them.
Right.
We know the groups have it. So I mean, it's being kept under wraps for now, but it will come out. There's no doubt about it. And we've helped people around the world build these units over the years. What I've always told people is, don't try to sell it. Don't try to go on the news with it. Just keep it to yourself. If you don't make a big deal about it, no one's going to bother you. Don't try to get all crazy with it. Just keep it on your farm and let it give you water and be happy, right? And everyone will leave you alone. The time will come when this technology will become prevalent, and it's going to blow away what we're currently doing, especially electricity.
So that was the next question. You said that this is not compatible with electrical devices. So how do we adapt this technology or this information you're talking about to our lives that are run by electricity today?
So in the interim, if we had to, we could use the devices to turn generators to produce electricity. Okay, that's possible. You could take the magnesium and you could turn a whole bunch of generators. You have 480 horsepower with it. You could take the piston and you could turn generators with it. Now, if we do that, we're shortchanging ourselves. Okay, we're still our addiction to electricity is gonna have to come to an end at some point. And we're gonna have to give up the baby toys and start playing with the real stuff that will actually take us into the space age. At some point, we've got to let go of electricity. It's inevitable. It's going to happen.
One other thing, if there were communities that required or wanted or requested, your assistance in setting them up with your knowledge of this technology, would you be prepared to come and assist such a community to set this up?
We've been doing it for years.
Have you? Okay.
We've been helping people out for years with these units. We've sent them all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I'm not opposed to that. Yeah, it's a good start. It's a good demonstration. It doesn't do what really needs to be done, in our opinion, which is to turn the grid off. Because we firmly believe, and I'm going to say something that's completely outrageous, and I it's going to be on record that I'm saying it, which is sad. But I'll take the heat and the embarrassment of it. We firmly believe 100% that the generation of electricity through the mega power plants, the big stuff, I'm not talking about solar, I'm not talking about DC, I'm not talking about chemical generation, I'm talking about conventional power plants, coal, nuclear. We firmly believe that the power plants are the primary cause of ozone depletion. It's okay if you laugh. We firmly believe that if that technology continues, we are going to be put in a position on this planet of survival where we're going to have to make a change, and a change is going to happen. And there's a lot of big players involved in this. I'm absolutely nothing in this. I'm just a messenger. There's a lot of people that know what's going on. There's a lot of big players. There's a lot of government players, and there's a lot of probably entities that are watching the planet very closely. So the ozone is being depleted. The ozone has not stopped being depleted. It had very, very little to do with chemicals at all, and it has almost everything, in our strong opinion, our very firm opinion, to do with electricity. And the way electricity works, when you move a magnet, like when you move these jumbo magnets through these jumbo coils and you create this incredibly powerful drop factor and you strip the ozone, you strip the ionosphere, and that energy coagulates around those power plants and it doesn't recycle at all. We are slowly draining the system and we are not replenishing it. With this technology, we will replenish it and we will balance the system. Every time you see some sort of strong vortexual storm like a hurricane or a tornado or something like that, anything that has to do with a vortex, it's well known that that storm starts in the ionosphere. There's a phenomenon that happens in the ionosphere, and you know, the dark scientists of the planet have been playing around with this. They play around with it all over the planet through technologies like HAARP. They're jacking around with the ionosphere. They're trying to create imbalances in the ionosphere. When they do that, the ionosphere pulls back. It tries to balance itself. So it's pulling energy up. It's pulling energy from the Earth. There's a rim of energy inside the Earth. There's a rim of energy outside the Earth, on the outer edges of the ionosphere. Those two rims of energy communicate with each other. When something's out of balance, the Earth tries to balance it. The more the system gets out of balance, the stronger the Earth is going to react and try to keep balance. And with that lovely positive note, sorry about that. Any last questions?
One more question.
One more?
Because we have to wrap up. Hello? No, I guess I just had a quick question. Okay. You know, when I hear magnetron, I think of microwaves. Are you functioning in that?
No, it's a completely different concept. I mean, yes, that is the conventional. Yeah, you're right. But no, when we're talking about magnetrons, what we're really talking about is the coalescence of neutrons. So a magnetron. The reason they called it a magnetron is because as they started analyzing what was happening in the unit and this like neutral magnetic pulse that's coming in the unit, they said, well, holy crap, like what is this thing? It's so strong. It's this strong form of energy and we can't put a polarity on it. Like what's happening? We can't even figure out what the heck it is. So it kind of ended, but it's got this magnetic quality to it. Like it'll attract to anything. It's weird. Like so you can offer this attract field. So it ended up, that was the name. It became the magnetron motor because it works off these essentially magnetrons.
Yeah, my grandfather, he always referred to magnets as siphons.
Yes.
As what? As siphons.
That's we're after it. All right, you guys. I think that's a wrap for now.
Whoa.